Season-long arcs, who doesn't like them? No one. They're extremely common today, but in the 1970s, arcs would be the length of one story in a serialized format like Doctor Who was. Today, we'll be looking at the first story in an arc of loosely connected stories dealing with the common enemy. This arc spanned 3 seasons and was one of 2 in the history of Doctor Who that was left unfinished. This arc began in today's story and included the Terror of the Autons, the Mind of Evil, the Claws of Axos, Colony in Space, the Daemons, the Sea Devils, the Time Monster, Frontier in Space, and would have completed in 1974 with The Final Game, a story that would have taken inspiration from The Final Problem, from the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, that would have ended the Third Doctor's run. This arc is referred to by fans as the Master Arc, and was cut short due to the death of Roger Delgado, who portrayed the Master, the Doctor's Moriarty, if you say. We'll get to what the last story would have entailed after the beginner's guide to Doctor Who is over, and today we look at the complete story arc, but not for now. Let's dig into the Third Doctor's Terror of the Autons. The Terror of the Autons was written by Robert Holmes, directed and produced by Barry Letts, and originally broadcast on Saturdays from the 2nd to the 23rd of January, 1971. Before we begin, let me take a moment to explain the Doctor's current situation, for it is necessary to understand this story. When the Second Doctor left, the production team decided to introduce his race, the Time Lords, and have him regenerate to be exiled on Earth in 1969's The War Games. On Earth, he became the scientific advisor for a unit, the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, under Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge-Stewart, played by Nicholas Courtney, defending the Earth from various alien menaces as a more Monster of the Week type show, or Monster of the Month, if you prefer. Let's begin with Episode 1. We open at a circus, a little weird for an episode of Doctor Who, but I'll go with it. We hear the sound of a TARDIS materializing, but a coach appears, and a man in black steps out. The manager of the circus asks who this man is, and he introduces himself as the Master, played by Roger Delgado. The manager, Louis Rossini, says he has no need of conjurers, thinking that he must be, considering the coach box appeared out of thin air, but the Master tells him that he needs him, Hugh Russell. The Master looks into his eyes and hypnotizes him. They go into a museum where they steal the Nestine control unit from Spearhead from space. Meanwhile, the Doctor, played by Jon Pertwee, still in his exile on Earth for meddling in time, is trying to fix his TARDIS. There's a knock on his door, and a young woman enters, played by Katie Manning. The Doctor says he doesn't want any tea today, when the machine he has been working on catches fire. The woman rushes to get a fire extinguisher to douse the flames, but the Doctor says she's ruined it, and explains to her that steady-state micro-welding, which is what he was working on, developed by the Lemodians, a race with 9 opposable digits, always produces more smoke than fire. The Doctor again asks her to leave, but she says she's not the tea lady, and that she is Josephine Grant, his new assistant after Liz Shaw left off-screen between seasons 7 and 8. When asked about her credentials, she says she took general science. Now, you have to note, the chemistry of the scene is great, and you get a feel for this new season and relationship. Jo shows him what she came in for, a report of the theft of the Nestine control unit. At the Beacon Hills Research Center, scientist Gooch is eating his lunch when the Master uses his TCE, tissue compression eliminator, to shrink him, and proceeds to plug in the control unit into the satellite. Gooch's boss goes to see what's going on, and is hypnotized. Back at Unit, the Doctor and the Brigadier are discussing why Jo Grant is his new assistant. The Brigadier agrees to reassign her if the Doctor breaks the news to her himself, which he gets a chance to, but he can't bring himself to do it, and I can see why. Although she's only gotten 3 minutes of screen time, Katie Manning just oozes happiness. You could probably say never say no to that face. Jo announces that the two scientists have disappeared, so the Doctor goes to the control tower while Captain Mike Yates, played by Richard Franklin, takes the Brigadier and Jo inside to meet the Director when they arrive at the research station. Outside the control tower, a Time Lord appears, traveling incognito in Victorian-era clothing. He informs the Doctor of the Master's arrival and how he will try to kill him, but the Doctor refuses to be worried. The Time Lord tells him that the Master's degree in cosmic science was higher than the Doctor's, and he should be worried. But he also informs the Doctor of a surprise. Inside, the Masters rig the control center to explode if the door would open from the outside. The Time Lord disappears after wishing the Doctor good luck. The Doctor charges in and catches and disarms the bomb, as yet Mike Yates brings in the director. The Doctor notices Gooch's lunch, and in its lunchbox is a shrunken version of Gooch. The Master is meeting with Mr. Farrell at a plastics plant, as disguising himself as Colonel Masters. In the Doctor's lab, the Doctor explains that a Nestine is a disembodied space octopus that manifests itself as plastics. He explains how the radio telescope must be their bridge point. The Brigadier has searches of plastic factories set up. The Master hypnotizes Farrell, and the Doctor has disarmed the Master's bomb. The Master connects the control unit into the plastics factory, while Jo is sneaking up from the outside, but is found and hypnotized. The Master brings her into his office and tells her to return to unit with a negative report, and wipes her memory. Sergeant Benton, played by John Levine, explains that they found the missing scientist's car abandoned. Back in the plastic factory, Mr. Farrell is looking for the Master's employee card, and goes to fetch him to explain to Mr. McDermott, his second-in-command, about this new employee. But when he finds, the Master has made Autons, the plastics controlled by the Nestines. Sergeant Benton has brought back a box given to him by Jo, which she opens with a skeleton key. When the Doctor yells at her to close it because it's a bomb. On to episode 2. The Doctor throws the bomb out the window as it explodes. Captain Yates asks him how he knew it was a bomb, and the Doctor says Jo gave it away due to her post-hypnotic reaction from the Master. And Jo is in shock due to her having to do something against her innate nature. The Master shows McDermott a plastic chair that will blow up with the snap of his fingers. He has him sit in it, and he reluctantly does. When he sits in it, the chair starts to move and suffocates him. Mr. Farrell has his secretary terminate his employment in a very cool and casual manner. The Doctor has Jo wake up from hypnosis, and she freaks out about she had to open the box she was forced to. He asks her of where she was, to which she freaks out, saying that it was some factory somewhere. He has her just forget about it, knowing that it will probably come up if she isn't thinking. Mr. Farrell Sr. is informed of his business partner's death under the guise of a heart attack. He's mad at his son for throwing away all of his hard work, and the Master tries hypnotizing him into thinking there's nothing to worry about, but it doesn't work, and he decides to go home, giving his son 24 hours before he'll take over the company by coming out of retirement. Farrell Sr. says that he must get rid of Colonel Masters by tomorrow. In the parking lot, the Master gets into Farrell Sr.'s car and turns the heater on, and places an ugly plastic doll in the back of his car. At unit, Jo apologizes to the Doctor and the Brigadier informs the Doctor of how little time they have before they must take some sort of action. The Doctor compares his subtlety to a bull in a china shop, as Captain Yates informs them of how a circus might be where one of the missing professors is hiding, Professor Phillips, and the Doctor decides to head out. Jo talks to Mike about how she's feeling and how this is all her fault, but he advises her just to let it go and it'll work itself out in the end. In Farrell's car, the doll picks itself up, but when Farrell turns off his heating, it stops moving and becomes limp again. In the plastics factory, Farrell Jr. asks the Master on why all of the workers have been sent home early, and the Master reveals his plan to kill the Doctor at the circus. At the circus, it turns out that Jo is hidden away in the back of his car. Mr. Farrell Sr. has arrived home and is showing the doll to his wife, who thinks it's evil. The Doctor notices the carriage TARDIS and realizes that it must be the Master's, but before he can get inside, Hugh Russell captures him and ties him up in his office. He questions the Doctor to why he's so interested in the Master's box, to which he answers he was listening for certain vibrations. He offers Russell money to let him go, but he refuses. Jo phones the Brigadier to get their men down there when she notices Professor Phillips go into the Master's TARDIS. Mr. and Mrs. Farrell have returned home from an errand, and Mrs. Farrell notices the doll has moved, but thinks nothing of it and goes to make coffee. The doll starts to move again, very creepily, and Mr. Farrell notices it, but is strangled before he can set out. His wife walks in on him dead and screams. The doctor is still being interrogated by Russell, who threatens to feed him to the tigers, but he has to leave a guard on him while he goes to fetch the master. The doctor sarcastically calls for help after noticing Joe in the window, who hits his guard down with a bottle, and they escape. The master watches the circus and notices the doctor and Joe escaping. Professor Phillips rushes in on the doctor and Joe brandishing a grenade, but the doctor convinces him to run off where it explodes, and he dies. The doctor goes into the master's TARDIS and steals the dematerialization circuit, as the police pick them up. The brigadier arrives, and knowing that it's not one of his cars, he goes to bail them out. In the car, the doctor comes to and thanks the policeman, but at unit, Benton has informed the brigadier that it's not the police. The doctor notices they missed a turn to unit and they're heading into a quarry. The doctor questions the officer driving. The doctor takes off the officer's face when he doesn't get a response to reveal it's an Auton. Let's move on to episode 3. The doctor knocks out the driving Auton and they rush out of the car. The two Autons come out ready to shoot, but the doctor and Joe have hidden away in the bushes. Unit arrives and the brigadier avoids being shot at. He tries to shoot back, but the doctor tells him that the bullets can't stop them. So Mike Yates runs them over with a car down into the quarry, and they escape. At the factory, the master finds out of the failure to kill the doctor, but is not angry, going so far as to compliment him for surviving thus far, showing how worthy of an opponent they are. At unit, the brigadier is reading off a list of what they know already, which the doctor and the audience already knows. The doctor asks if he's finished and if his car's back. When answered yes, he goes into his TARDIS after the brigadier leaves. And when he comes out, he tells Joe that the military mind is inferior to his own, but he agrees to apologize. If he gets the time, of course. Joe asks what the circuit is, and he says he'll show her as he goes inside his TARDIS and tries to take off. But it fails due to the dematerialization circuit of the Master's being a Mark II and his being a Mark I. His TARDIS was an earlier model. But that means, in a very twisted irony, the Master cannot leave either. The Master unveils some of the finest plastic daffodils in the world as creepy Autons dressed up as mascots hand them out in London. The doctor reads the report of the contents of the searches, and he outspurts on how worth it is. Joe tells him to calm down, and that they're doing everything that they possibly can. The brigadier comes in to introduce Mr. Brownrose, who has come to bring to light an interesting case of many deaths. The doctor tells him that he and the brigadier will not drop everything that they are doing for one small matter. The problem is that many unconnected deaths are from shock and asphyxiation, except the first two, which were Farrell Sr. and Mr. McDermott. Well, that's convenient that it would be these two that started the deaths. The doctor goes to speak with the distraught Mrs. Farrell, who explains that how her husband died, and how he was very disturbed over how their son had fallen an influence to Colonel Masters. Mike Yates stops a telephone engineer at unit who has come to install a phone in the doctor's office. Mrs. Farrell shows him the troll doll, and she says that it must have moved from the radiator to under the curtains. The doctor and Joe are back at unit with Yates and the brigadier. The doctor cuts open the doll to reveal solid plastic. He leaves to make a full analysis and asks Joe to go get some things that he will need. The doctor is puzzled about what activated it, and while he waits for the equipment, he and the brigadier go out to investigate the plastics factory. On the bus of the Autons, the telephone worker arrives, reveals himself to be the Master. Yates has decided to use the doctor's Bunsen burner to make hot cocoa, and when he leaves to get a pot, the doll starts moving to attack Joe. She throws a shoe at it and yells for Mike to come quickly. He shoots and deactivates it. The doctor and the brigadier have arrived at the plastics factory and find the door unlocked. They walk to Farrell's office, and find it and the rest of the factory deserted. They notice a plastic daffodil on the floor, the doctor tries to open the safe in the back as the brigadier finds papers that say that Farrell's reserved a bus. In the safe is an Auton, which the brigadier shoots at, and the doctor remarks at how persistent they are. When they return to unit, Joe explains what happened, and Yates admits that he tried to make cocoa in the doctor's lab. The Doctor realizes that all the deaths were determined by heat, and how the plastic daffodil would activate using it. He has everyone leave when he gets a phone call. The Master's on the other line saying goodbye, as the phone cord picks itself up and strangles the Doctor. On to episode 4. The Doctor calls for help as the Brigadier rushes in and pulls a wire, apologizes for cutting his connection. The danger of the situation has finally reached the unit staff. The Doctor is heating the daffodil, but it doesn't activate, and Yates informs him of how the daffodils are being handed out, and they don't know how many exactly were exported. When the equipment arrives, the Doctor reads the molecular structure and finds the instructions imprinted on each daffodil. The Brigadier informs the Doctor that they located the coach and have an airstrike ready, and it will fire in an hour and a half. The structure has formed into a face as the daffodil comes alive with the shortwave radio of a walkie-talkie that Jo used. She goes towards it and it sprays her with a plastic on her nose and mouth, which would suffocate her if the Doctor didn't get it off with non-stick spray. With the Brigadier, the airstrike is confirmed, and the Doctor notices that carbon dioxide will dissolve the plastic, showing how the victims did not have any plastic on them when they were found. The Master shows up to kill the Doctor, but they seem to know each other. He informs them of how 450,000 daffodils have been distributed and puts his gun up to kill the Doctor. Jo bursts in, and after noticing his dematerialization circuit, he threatens to in the Doctor's hand. He threatens to kill Jo if it isn't handed over. Jo gives up when the airstrike's going on, and the Master decides to let them live, taking them prisoner. The airstrike will go off in 30 seconds when it has to be called off because the Doctor is showing up with Jo and the Master in the bus. The Master ties them up and is informed of Mr. Farrell being no longer useful. The Doctor signals to the Brigadier with the brake lights that he could reach. He signals daffodils are lethal, activated soon, destroy immediately. Guard radio research station. Jo reveals that she's an amateur escapologist and has gotten her hand free. The bus starts moving towards the research station, and Farrell tries to stop it, and it crashes. Jo sprains her ankle on the way out, and the clown Autons start firing on unit. Master gets to the top of the radio control tower and sends a signal to the Nestines as they arrive. The Master gloats to the Doctor and the Brigadier about how he's won. A battle ensues between Unit and the Autons, while the Doctor and the Master, trying to save his own skin, reverse the polarity to send the Nestines back, ending the battle outside. The Master escapes the tower into the coach and walks out. Benton shoots him, and he dies. The Doctor, Jo, the Brigadier, and Benton go to the body, and the Doctor pulls back to the face to reveal that it's Farrell, as the real Master drives away in the coach. The Doctor reveals that he had given the Master his broken dematerialization circuit, putting him in exile on Earth also. Final thoughts? The first 3 parts of the story are excellently paced, written, acted, and shown. Jon Pertwee and Katie Manning are joys to watch due to their great presences on screen. Roger Delgado is a very convincing villain, and a joy to watch as he and Jon Pertwee work off of each other greatly. They seem to have known each other for a long time on Gallifrey. Unit's greatly integrated into the story, and do a nice job on introducing Mike Yates as a recurring character. Also, the effects for the doll, while dated, still look really creepy, something in the way that it moves. But sadly, near the climax, in the final part, is lackluster, with a bad effect for the supposedly octopus-like nesting consciousness, which it really just looks sort of like a light in the sky that looks kind of like an octopus, when comparing it to the one a year earlier that was physical, that nearly strangled Jon Pertwee. And everything just kind of falling apart when it's destroyed. Otherwise, everything would have been great. And I give Doctor Who, Terror of the Autons, 90% for its great story, pacing, and performances, but lackluster climax. This story is available in the Mannequin Mania box set in Regions 2 and 4, along with the Spearhead from Space Special Edition. Sadly, the Terror of the Autons DVD release is now out of print in Region 1, but you might be able to find the DVD on eBay or Amazon for a raised price. Both were released in 2011. I'll see you next time in the Beginner's Guide to Doctor Who with the 4th Doctor in Pyramids of Mars.